Welcome, blockheads. This is episode 109 of Business on the Block, February 19th, 2025. Right now, we're going to be tackling jobs, AI, and the future of work. This week on the pod, we're going to share the latest data on the seismic shifts in the job market. You're going to hear how newspapers are reinventing the newsroom, and we'll explain why the latest update of Grok 3 is surpassing ChatGPT. So I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Michelle Peterson-Clark.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone.
And Mike Neubauer.
Can you believe we're almost in March? Crazy.
All right. I'm taking us into story number one. The World Economic Forum has released the Future of Jobs Report 2025. This report outlines how automation will displace 92 million jobs by 2030. That's within less than 5 years. It also says, though, 170 million new roles will emerge. So the bad news is 41% of all employers plan to replace employees with AI by 2030. They say, however, these employers are looking for skills now rather than degrees. So in terms of education and upskilling, it's not so much what your degree says, it's what you know. We'll walk through the skills and demand, et cetera, in the story, but I want to get thoughts on this first. Michelle, you found this story. It's a killer one. So thank you. What are your thoughts on what you saw in the Future of Jobs report?
Job killer one.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, look, I find it really quite interesting from lots of different points of view because, and I have a child in his last year of high school who has to start thinking about university and stuff. And I've been banging on about that. You've got to go to university, you've got to get a degree of something. My husband says if he does something in the arts, it's basket weaving. Marc, as an engineer, would probably agree with that. But, I've sort of said, there's people with PhDs working at the local supermarkets. So that's what you're competing against. So, if you're 17 and a half and you leave school and you're not doing anything else to sort of further your education, I think that is a problem. However, when you read this report or when you look at some of the stuff here, he might be better off just doing, 10 8-week courses over the next year to actually develop a skill set in a particular field if that's what he's interested in. But I just find it, I think the transition is going to take a bit longer than, it's not going to happen only this year, I don't think. I cannot see someone who is, 19 or 20 years old who has generally no experience other than their part-time job at McDonald's after school, stepping into roles that require particular skill sets. So what do those kids do in the meantime? That's part of the problem. So that was the first thing I looked at. The second thing, and I think it would be really good to talk about this amongst ourselves, on page 23 of the report, if you actually download it and have a look at it, it gives you a list of the top growing jobs and then the top declining jobs. And it's really quite telling. Really, really interestingly, the top growing job between 2025 and 2030 is not going to be anything to do with AI. It's farm workers, labourers, other agricultural workers, because regardless of what we say or not, we all still have to eat. The whole planet has to have food for the next, not just the next 5 years that this job report tackles. And so, then there's truck and delivery drivers. So that's delivering the food, delivering your Amazon packages, all of that kind of stuff. And then when you look at the jobs that are declining, some of them, it's like you look at that and you go, oh my goodness, like these are jobs where they are pretty regulated. Some of them are quite highly regulated. So we're talking accountants, law firms, though banking, bookkeeping, those sorts of things where, that you have to actually have qualifications. You need to be generally members of a professional body, and they're regulated by the government in terms of conduct and stuff like that. Those jobs are going to almost disappear in certainly the next 10 to 15 years. So, yeah, I think we should have a discussion rather than me necessarily talk about it all the time. But, I just find it really, really telling of what's going to happen in the future.
Mike, is Michelle right? What was your take on this report?
Well, first of all, I didn't read it because I'm not going to give any credit to the World Economic Forum.
I was wondering about that, Mark.
Yeah, so I don't believe any of this as far as I can throw it from them. But shout out to my brother for the basket weaving degree. He definitely has one of those. Look, the thing that kind of strikes me about this, just in its general form, again, didn't read it, is that, we're sort of moving back into the trend of experience outweighs knowledge, because you sort of gain the knowledge through experience. And, it wasn't too far long. I mean, we're talking 2 people ago, right? Like my grandfather, where he would start in a company, work his way from the mailroom and work his way all the way up just by understanding the infrastructure and how that company operated. And then we sort of entered into this weird phase where it wasn't necessarily blue collar. Everybody was really trying to get into that white collar mode, where a 22-year-old would come and all of a sudden be the managing director of a group who's been in the company for 40 years. And while, they're fresh out of school with these fresh ideas and all these different things, they really didn't understand operationally how the cogs in the wheel sort of made the system move. And that, unfortunately, is something that only comes with experience. You need to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and why. So it's almost promising that we're sort of moving in that trend. Now, what's unpromising on that same front is that elements like AI are going to start taking over some of those mailroom type jobs, which forces people to either start with a higher level of knowledge base or understanding about the particular industry, even if it's not the specific company. So that being said, I mean, one of the more common things you hear about kids that are, graduating college with, 14 degrees and 2 PhDs because they just didn't want to leave school, no understanding of what actually is required of them in the world, is that all the jobs that they're trying to get are demanding experience. And again, we're sort of moving into that upper echelon of the cycle repeating itself, where we want that sort of that experience and that taste in the industry, in the actual marketplace, instead of regurgitating something on a piece of paper that some hippie professor can grade for you.
So for those who didn't read the report like Mike, the skills in greatest demand were listed as AI, big data, networking, cybersecurity. Those are the things that the hard skills, if you will. But it also included in that list a growing number of soft skills: creative thinking, leadership ability, talent management. And so that's where I'm going to go with this. I really believe that to your point, Mike, you're right. The low end jobs, like the entry level mailroom stuff, is already AI-able, and that will increasingly creep higher up the corporate structure as these machines get better and more capable. PhD level takes over the mid range jobs, et cetera. But I think that the machines will never be able to really master the networking piece of human interaction. And here's why. They'll do the skills. That's not the problem. They'll do them better than humans. They already do this in the sales world. It's that people want to deal with people. And so I really think that when it comes to like deal making and leadership, that's not something you get a degree in, but those are going to be the skills in demand going forward. Now I'm also very biased because I come with a liberal arts degree.
Basket weaving.
From a pristine engineering university of Lehigh. So my point is, I think this is an interesting report. I agree with you on the World Economic Council, whatever, like that. They've got their bias, but AI is definitely going to creep further into the workforce, and in my opinion, create an army of entrepreneurs.
Well, it's also going to go ahead, Michelle.
I was going to say, I think to be fair to Mike, we need to point out that I'm sure he read the article that we've referenced, but there's a PDF link in the article to the actual full report. So that's the bit I'm going to assume Mike didn't read.
Anything regarding World Economic Forum, I'm not giving 2 seconds of my time to. But I think that, with respect to AI and the management of AI, just like any other tool, right? Like a plumber could still use tools they used 50 years ago, but will they be the most efficient at their trade? The answer is no. They need to understand how to use modern tools. So similar to that, I'm not saying that we need to teach old dogs new tricks, but we need to figure out ways to incorporate efficiency, again, utilizing some tools like AI in order to perfect and enhance an employee's job description in whatever industry it is. And just like anything else, learning how to use a tool in the context of what's best for the company takes time and it takes experience. So I think that, while the entrepreneur is on the horizon of potentially being, one of the bigger, I guess, career paths that this is ultimately leading towards, I really feel like, the average, one of 40,000 employees in some whatever company is still very much a viable candidate to pick up these tools and make themselves more reliable to the company than without.
I mean, I think one of the things too, we talked about it at the end of the show last week. After the show last week, not on the show, about more and more, like if you're on LinkedIn and the process of applying for jobs these days where, a job goes up on LinkedIn and within 15 minutes, 100 people have applied because, LinkedIn has the quick apply and apparently, you don't need to worry about cover letters or actually addressing the selection criteria anymore. And so more and more people who have become increasingly frustrated with the process of looking for a new position, whether it be applying through, Seek or Indeed or LinkedIn, and just the fact that these days you don't even get a thanks but no thanks. You just never hear from half of the employers. And so people have gone, what? After 6 months of the demoralizing process of that, I'm going to take the skills that I have, and they may or may not have degrees that go with those skills. But, if you've been a marketer or a lawyer or whatever for, 10 years, 15 years, you have got skills. And what they're doing then is turning that towards entrepreneurship. And, looking at what's one or two of the skills that they've got that they do the best, and they're starting small businesses around that. And I'm seeing that. And I know, Mark, you said to me the same, that you were seeing it too, more and more, certainly around LinkedIn and, those sorts of more professional type associations that we have.
I think that this is going to continue. Mike, I do agree with you that AI is a tool that should be used and should be taught, and the employees should. But the reality is they're going to get initially wiped out. However, I used to be of the mind that jobs are going away, et cetera. I have come to change that tune. I do think more jobs will be created from this than will be destroyed. They're just going to be different. So we're not going to
always the case.
I didn't think that initially.
Well, I mean, we've seen this trend. Again, everything is cyclical, right? It's just a matter of the different period of time and the different technologies available at the time, right? Shoe shining was, a shoe repairman was on every corner, right? It was almost a necessity due to the demand. And then all of a sudden we figured out how to import shoes that are made for fractions of pennies. And, all of a sudden that business disappears. But there's still a very small niche of, people that still have that skill set that's still valuable. AI isn't going to replace that. It's just that different opportunities presented itself that ultimately led to the destruction of a mass industry. But I guarantee you, in every city, there's always going to be somebody with that skill set that puts it to use due to imported high-end Italian leather shoes or something like that, right? So, I don't think this is going to be any different. It's an evolution. Now, the evolution has to, we've seen it happen in the car industry, too, with the automated process and production. Once that hit the assembly lines, all the union workers were freaking out. We're not going to have jobs. But now, instead of just actually screwing in the screw, you have to understand how the machine operates to efficiently screw that screw in, right? So it's no different. It's just a different period of time.
I think one of the problems I think that as a world we will have is that if you think about the fact that the more manual and, if you like, menial kind of jobs, so the farm labourer, the fruit pickers, the whatever, like I don't know what it's like in America, but in Australia we have temporary visas for people to come in to pick fruit because Australians don't want to do it, or there's not enough people to do it. So I think that when you're going to have people who have worked 20 or 30 years in a position of, whether they work from home or whether they had a nice office, downtown, etc., suddenly being unemployed, those sorts of people are going to find it very difficult to turn their minds to be able to do some of those lower tasks that are still going to need to be done. So unless an AI can start going into a field and picking apples off of a tree, I know that there are mechanization for some of this stuff, but some things like grapes and things like that have to be picked by a person at the moment. And so, because they're fragile and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know I think that there's going to have to be a huge mind shift for people who become unemployed to be able to say that, well, I can go and do that job. I have to go and do that job because I need to feed my family.
Well, I'm going to tie this into what Marc said earlier about the entrepreneurship sort of exploding from this. An entrepreneur is willing to shovel elephant shit at the zoo to get their business to where they need to. That's the drive they have, because they understand that that's the lily pad they need to jump on in order to get to where they need to. The people who are looking for that paycheck for showing up 9 to 5, this is going to be I don't want to say the evolution of, survival of the fittest, but
I agree with you.
Kind of will be.
So I want to add one thing.
I agree, but I'm just saying it's the people having to actually get their minds around that.
For both those employees you referenced, Mike, the check the box, take the paycheck home, and the entrepreneurs who are running their own business, or honestly anyone going forward, I really think we shift into the soft skills surpassing the hard skills, in that I can AI out a lot of the machine stuff, like the hard skill stuff of coding. I can already do it. Writing, I can already do it. But the people skills are going to become in more demand. If you are a leader of a company and you're a crass individual, you're not going to attract the same talent. If you don't know how to creatively think around the problem, you're not going to win that market share. So I think that skill set going forward becomes, if you're an employee looking for a new job, if you are an entrepreneur starting a thing, you want to start developing your soft skills, and your ability, your interactions with other people will open all the doors, especially when what you can do with your hands doesn't matter as much.
And that's the dirty secret they don't tell you in school. They'll tell you how to do things, but they don't tell you how to generate the business. And really everything you do involves sales. You're selling your skill set, you're selling your product, your service in whatever you're doing. And that's only something that you realize whether you're good or you're bad at through this experience. And I think that as time progresses and as we see the evolution of these things, again, we're going to start to weed out the types of individuals that have that drive in order to make something either for themselves or more productive for a company.
The one thing I'll add to that, Mike, is most people don't understand the reality of what you just said. We're all selling something. Entrepreneurs know that overtly, right? They're selling to survive. But employees are also selling indirectly whatever product or service that company that is employing them does. And they don't make that connection. But the reality is, are you selling your own product or someone else's? Because you're selling.
Yes.
And it all doesn't have to be for yourself. There's guys that have phenomenal careers working for other people. And, I mean, I have friends that are in, the absolute best case scenario that anybody could possibly be in. They have, this limited time window where they're expected to work. They have the scope of work and what they're expected to do. They get paid well. They have tremendous benefits. They're providing this service, call it sales, into the company, whether they realize it or not. It is still a very possible and profitable enterprise to go into. I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to do something for themselves. But the latter takes up a lot more effort, a lot more energy. And, we just got to see as this thing develops, which companies are going to pull the plug on the employee side of things and shift more into the AI model. And I guess that segues into what we're talking about next, because this one's going to be fun for me, man. I can't wait.
Yep. I think it's going to be the Klarna model of they just don't hire rather than fire. Let's go talk about it in story number 2. Oh, Michelle, anything?
No,
We're going to see story number 2. The New York Times has approved the use of internal AI in its news business. The staff there has been directed to use AI for things like editing, creating headlines, generating interview questions. The Times has declined the request for comment, but the conversation around this is get AI rolling in the newsrooms. Thoughts on this one, Mike? We'll start with you. You referenced in the last story. What's your take?
Stamping at the bit.
I mean, how fitting that the New York Times declines the comment. Their whole job is to get people to comment on stories, and they decline to comment on the fact that this story might actually, decimate everybody that works there. This is sort of shades of what's possible with Sports Illustrated and what we saw with that. But the truth is, you're replacing one autonomous drone with another. And that's really the way I look at something like this.
That's been insulting.
Well, unfortunately, it's true. The New York Times has jumped off the cliff and the deep end of credibility. They are definitely not what they once were. And I think AI is sort of one of the reasons for that, and the development of, social media, the internet. They're not going to these sources anymore for the news. They're going for memes. And I think that that's really what they've come to terms with. And if AI can help create some of those memes, bring it on, because I'm sure they'll come up with some really fun stuff.
Michelle, what's your take on this story?
Yeah, so, I think it is a little bit ironic. I mean, do we remember what episode number was it when for want of a better term, shitstorm around the Sports Illustrated pretending that journalists were real people?
That was November of 2023, November, end of the year.
Backstories, and long walks on the beaches. They literally created all of this.
Keep going.
But people, like heads rolled over that. Like
the CEO got fired.
Yeah, the CEO got fired. I mean, now it's like, oh yes, AI, come walk in our door. And so, I think that, they say a week's a long time in politics or whatever, but, like this sort of stuff's incredible. And for those of us that still remember about, how it was just a whole, it was big news at the time. And now it's sort of like, yeah, okay. I often wonder anyway that there are newspapers or, online, whether they're online or whether they're in print media, where there's nobody checking. I don't think they have editorial, staff anymore, because you see double repeated lines in a row. You see two ands in a row. You see spelling wrong. They reference towns that, like if there's a Melbourne here in Australia, but they reference the one that's in the US, all of that kind of stuff happens all the time now.
Sure.
And, for those of us that are of the age that we are, you look at that and you go, yeah, nobody proofread this copy before it was posted online. And that, I think that's actually the norm now. And unless we get to the point where AI tools are trained to actually look for that kind of stuff, you'll still get these kind of mistakes. And yeah.
As I recall,
we used to rely on spell check for that, right? But the truth is, if you forget the T in it still spells a word. So
yes.
Spell check couldn't come up with it.
Yes.
As I remember, back in November of 23, when the AI scandal hit Sports Illustrated, and again, to your point, Michelle, you're right. The CEO got fired. It was a big to-do. They were fabricating news stories under fake names that didn't exist and not claiming the AI was involved. We said this at the time. For the longtime listeners will remember, it wasn't that they used AI. It was that they were deceptive in the use of AI. Mm-hmm. New York Times has gone the other way. Like, this is if you can't beat them, join them kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I do think this is the model going forward. Mike, to your point, they have lost control of the narrative of the news and not just the New York Times. And so what can you do? If you're the Times, purely from a business perspective, there's a business program, what do you do to make money if people don't trust you to give them the news?
Well, I mean, I'm sure they can't lie about what happened on Wall Street. That's pretty, apparent all over the place. I think the opinions being masqueraded as news is really what, crippled this whole industry, not just the Times. But, it'd be interesting. And, I'm not really trying to give the New York Times any advice, because I'd love to see them just buried forever. But if they do come up with this AI concept, rather than it just being an editing tool and they actually make it sort of a beat reporter where it's given facts and then it can pump out a story. Own it, man. Own it. I mean, back in November, I think I brought it up then, at the beginning part of last year, I started, just a little test run where I was training AI bots to write different pieces that I wrote myself. So I would feed it with information and it would pump out a blog post. And I had that on my website, but I didn't claim it as me. I literally created a Your Ops bot. And I gave it the credit. I told it what, I just basically did the refining as far as making sure that it didn't say George Washington was black. And, I just made sure that it was, accurate in the sense of the context of whatever the article was written about. And it was mostly tech, blockchain, AI kind of conversations anyway. But the point is that if they own it, I guarantee you they're going to get a little bit more of a generalized reception to it. We all know what AI is at this point. I don't think you're going to find too many people who have not experienced it in any way, shape, or form. The cool stuff is still out there, even if it's AI. We don't have to pretend that it's real, right? Video games are awesome. We know they're fake, even though they keep getting more realistic and better and the gameplay gets in more. We know at the end of the day, this is not the reality. Now, some people make it their reality, and that's a whole different set of problems. But again, if they own this concept, and this goes for any business, if you own the concept of replacement with AI, own it. Don't pretend it doesn't exist, because that's where you're going to get caught as a liar and with your pants down.
I have two thoughts on this. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, if we tie this back to last week's story about the BBC opening up their content to AI and, excuse me, and working out what, was it factual, was it not, whatever. And one of the biggest things I think out of that, even though Mike poo-hooed the whole story, was that the AI could not determine between opinion pieces that on the BBC website are labeled as opinion pieces and the real news. And it sort of combobulated those things and got confused about that. And I think that, when you look at the fact that the New York Times are saying they're going to have this internal system and they're using it for training and they're doing this and whatever. I mean, I think that as we've talked about with lots of different AI stories, guardrails are really going to have to become their best friend in order to not have the whole paper go down the toilet. Even though
I actually think that's what's going to eventually happen, Michelle, because if I could do custom LLM for my own personalized outreach or personalized marketing, why wouldn't I do personalized news? I think that in the old days, we're old enough to remember the concept, the term that doesn't get used anymore, the slant of the news. You guys remember that term?
Yeah.
Nowadays in the tech world, that's known as bias, but that's what that was. And by the way, Mike, to your point, people do. Propaganda has been proven that if you say a lie long enough and loud enough, people believe it. So what's the bias slant of these news things? I don't want to hear it. I'm going to just tune it out with my own LLM. And eventually these news organizations, they become another thing, but there's no such thing as the news going forward, in my opinion.
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's the opinion, right? And, it's almost ironic because we talk about AI literally every episode now, and we talk about the advancements in AI and, how at the end of the day, it's a program trained by humans designed to replicate and cater to humans. Well, humans in its very nature are trying to, it's almost been a historical piece to craft the opinion predicated around the news. So if we can't tell the difference between opinion and news by watching the news, how the hell are we supposed to train an AI to notice the difference?
Yeah, I think that news organizations don't exist the way they do today in 5 to 10 years. And as a small business, you want to be aware of what information are you taking in? The fact that these machines can't tell the difference between opinion and fact. And by the way, Mike, to your point, Wall Street, even in the fact side of fact, like trading, there's always opinion. The gold market, there's a panic in gold. Is it, or is it like people would always have an opinion on their thing?
Well, a lot of Wall Street is futures too, right? Like it's about taking that next leap to predict where it's going to be 2 minutes from now, instead of just sort of analyzing what's going on. That's what always cracked me up about, seeing the stock prices in the newspaper. I mean, we are ancient miles away from that period in time, only a day later or a couple hours later, depending on when you pick up the newspaper. But I remember as a kid, like in economics class or, just through whatever little investments I had growing up, gifts or whatever. I had Disney stock given to me when I was like 8. I would go to the newspaper and I would look it up. And then, this is before the internet. I guess you had really no other way of tracking that information other than obviously being in that world.
Reminds me of sports statistics on the back of cards.
Well, that too. We used to look up box scores in the newspaper as well. So look, the newspapers figured out a way to survive throughout all this. They were predicted to be the shoe repairman of the internet days. I'm not saying they're doing wonderful, but they have to figure out ways to pivot and make this work. And if AI is the answer and they can own that narrative, then why not? It's an industry just like everything else.
All right, I got to take us to our next story because as the Business on the Musk podcast, we need to touch base on this one. Grok 3. This is the new AI model out of X. XAI has unveiled a new updated Grok 3. Early results indicate it performs better across math, science, and coding than all of them. Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, DeepSeek. Grok 3 is available right now for $40 a month on the premium subscription for XAI. Elon Musk, off the back of this, has gotten high valuation. He's actually achieved Twitter's valuation is back to where it was when he bought it. None of this has been independently proven. This is just hearsay right now from Musk. So thoughts on this one?
Opinion versus facts.
Yeah, right. We'll start with you, Michelle, as our resident Musk expert. What do we think on this?
Look, I if I was more of a lady, I wouldn't say that this is a bit of a measuring contest amongst all the men at the moment that are running all these companies. So mine's better than yours, mine's bigger than yours, mine does more. I know how to use mine better than you do. Every week it's all the same. Yes, they're all good. Yes, they all do things that even 6 months ago we didn't think that they'd necessarily be able to do. And they're just going to all keep coming out with the bigger, better, swankier. It's like in the old days when your parents used to put up new wallpaper on the living room, one wall as a feature wall, and their friends would come and go, oh, and then they'd all have to get it. So then you'd have to do something else to your house to make it even better than the neighbors. This is actually what we're talking about here. Mike,
what's your thoughts on this?
Well, the fact that he says it's outperforming, I mean, that's a sales strategy, right? I mean, whether he can prove it or not is irrelevant. $40 a month. I mean, that's kind of steep, for an average user. I mean, I remember when OpenAI came out with theirs at $20, and even then people were complaining like, well, wait a minute, like, can't we figure out how to make this work without the necessary charges? So I'm glad his investment is starting to, sort of dig its way out of the pit of oblivion. If anything, just to, potentially sell it or, maybe build more into it. I think he's definitely jumped off the deep end with this AI thing, though. I don't know how much people are actually going to Twitter for their AI sourcing. Again, to Michelle's point, I think that we're going to ultimately run into an Apple versus Android type of scenario here where, people are just going to be familiar with the different tools. They're most likely going to be sourcing the information from the same location. It's really just going to be about the overall user experience. And, one of the fears with social media, in fact, this happened to a buddy of mine today with his wife. His wife's Facebook account got hacked. She was all of a sudden posting things that weren't her. Like how quickly before AI is able to hack into somebody's Twitter account and, start, so again, I really fear a lot about the security implications with this. I think I mentioned to you using Grok one and only time. I asked it, because there's an option that says, do a roast about yourself. So basically what it does is it analyzes all of the history you've ever done on Twitter, everything you've liked, commented, anything you've shared, any posts you made, and it starts to just basically do a whole stand-up skit about you. Now, I don't really use it at all, but it did take a lot of stuff about Battle Bunnies, about all these different projects that I was affiliated with that, did a lot on Twitter, and it just started roasting me left and right. And these are, these are things that I think that are very invasive that anybody can pull information on. You can ask Grok to look up information about other people. and it still has the information on that source, right? So again, I really feel like, no matter where this ends up, we need to be very conscious that this is not our own personal play toy. This is a transfer of information from us into this internet type world, which is accessible to everybody.
Right. So I want to mention that the social media copying features from each other, those platform competitions, is what the same thing we're seeing in the AI world. I do agree with you, Michelle. There's a bit of a measuring stick in terms of commercial success. They all need funding. So let's not forget that piece. But I really think this is not about Twitter, and I don't even think it's about Elon Musk, having an AI product, other than the fact of philosophy. Elon has this worldview that AI should be this beneficial to humanity thing. And Sam Altman has this view of this is a money-making tool, no different from what Zuckerberg did with Facebook. And so I think that Elon wants to have the Pepsi out to balance Coke. He's looking for it's a philosophical race for him. Not like he honestly believes he's saving humanity, and maybe he is. We don't know. But the point is, I don't think this is about the commercial success of Grok. For those who care, Elon says that Grok 3 has 10x the compute power of Grok 2. So he's proud of that. Great. I don't think it matters. No one cares. To your point, Michelle, if they all do everything, we don't care.
Can I say that, in my dedication to this show meant that I watched the Elon Trump interview with Hannity yesterday.
Were you chewing glass to calm down while you watched it?
It was interesting. The most interesting thing about about it all was that Elon called it Twitter the whole time he was talking, not X.
All right, I'm going to take us
that bit
into our favorite part of the show. This is, and there's a reason for this, and this is beyond just an American story. Doge is preparing to audit the U.S. gold reserves. The Department of Government Efficiency here in the United States is considering an audit of the U.S. gold at Fort Knox. The Fort Knox reserve is massive, reportedly valued at $425 billion. Critics have been calling for greater transparency after it was revealed the top secret locations are not subject to a yearly audit. So there's people who want to see how much gold does America actually have. For thoughts on this one, I think, Michelle, we'll start with you as the non-American, and we'll get you in a second, Mike.
Right. Well, it's always been a bit of a thing, isn't it? Certainly worldwide, about whether or not Fort Knox actually does hold gold bullion or not. The actual bars, if are what we're talking about here. I think it should be audited. I don't know why it isn't necessarily every year, but I think that Elon's going to have some fun. I mean, it was all a bit weird, really, because the story talks about, two people went down there, but one person didn't go down there or something. Like it was all a bit. They actually saw the gold bullion, blah, blah, blah. It's a bit of a joke, really, isn't it? Mike's smirking behind his shower cap there.
For a little context here, for those not from the financial world, the value of the gold matters for international currency valuations, including the U.S., but also as the reserve trade currency for the world. Other nations' value of their currencies matter. So, Mike, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think we need to ask John McClane from Die Hard if there actually is gold, but he would argue there is. I think that everything he's doing right now, and I hope you enjoyed that interview with popcorn and ordered your MAGA hat by now. Everything he's doing in auditing all of these systems is absolutely critical for us as Americans. We need to know what's happening behind this Wizard of Oz curtain. Now, will there be a fallout from it? Sure. What happens if you're this little country that has your entire investment predicated on this gold reserve? Then it turns out to be a farce. What does that do for your GDP? What does that do for your country? And if that rug needs to get lifted and sort of dusted off, why not now? and sort of rebuild it correctly from the ground up. I think that all of these systems need to be audited. I think they all need to be sort of, I don't want to say blown up and started over again, but we really need to understand how much is actually efficiently needed and then sort of go from there. There's no reason why we're spending the amount of money we are. Again, nobody taxes their citizens and sends money to the US. That is apparently something we do. So if we're doing it all under the false pretense of whatever this gold looks like or isn't there, then we're just building a house of cards here. And we have been for quite some time. And wouldn't it be hilarious if Elon is the one that uncovers this mess?
So I've got some thoughts. One is be careful what you wish for, but
Yes.
I want to just put the context on this. This isn't just a story about American gold and auditing. After World War II, there was a global world structure established on how money would work, right? With the destruction of Europeans, cities, and America still standing. So I won't bore you, but like the Bretton Woods arrangement, things like Basel II. And in a long story short, the U.S. would become the foundation upon which the world would rebuild. And that's been the case for 60-something years, whatever, more. And so we're living through today an overturning of that entire post-world structure that was built. For good or for ill, Donald Trump is overturning a lot of these organizations. So things like NATO, things like the UN, all of these things that the U.S. has been funding worldwide are it's changing for good or for bad, depending on your side of the coin. This is the basis of it all. The U.S.'s wealth is based on this gold right now. And an easy way to solve the U.S. debt problem is to revalue the gold, et cetera. I'm not going to share thoughts on that. I just want people to understand that's why this matters. My opinion on this story is this. There's a financial concept called rehypothecation. And on Wall Street, it just means you put your money in the bank and the bank loans that money out again. So the collateral they have, they can loan. That's allowed. The concept, again, has never been applied to gold. So if the U.S. is rehypothecating the gold, it would mean that the gold is there. It's in Fort Knox. However, it doesn't belong to the United States. It's been pledged to another country or whatever. And if that's true, and this comes to light, and to your point, Mike, they'd have to rebuild the whole system and it would be scandalous, and it would involve a lot of countries losing value of their currencies.
But this country moved away from the gold standard a long time ago.
In 71, Nixon took us off that standard, but they still maintain the gold as an asset, and they print money now, as we know.
Okay, so here's a question. Have other countries internationally been able to invest into T-bills, into, just overall debt for the country based around the reserve that they claim they have?
So the central banking structures are separate from the government structures, meaning the Federal Reserve is actually theoretically a creature of the U.S. government, but it's never been audited. It runs independently. It has its own board of governors. It's got nothing. They're run independently, and that's true in all the countries. So the entire central banking structures throughout the world, including Australia, including London, it would change that whole system.
Well, my again, we're in conspiracy corner. Elon walks in there. There's just a paper on the floor that says IOU.
Well, Elon's going to walk in there and find the gold. Well, I think. So again, conspiracy. However, if you want to do the paper trail, the gold doesn't belong to the United States government anymore.
How much of the gold is what?
Right.
Is also the issue. Like if there's 1 bar of gold, or there's 30,000 bars of gold, or 300 million bars of gold, there's a big difference.
If Australia decides they want their gold back and they're going to loan it to Venezuela, I'm just making this up, the United States, who's the holding of it right now, let's just say they're the caretaker, they just move the piece of paper across the same room because they're not going to ship it. They just, that block of gold now belongs to Venezuela. Was Australia? Not anymore. That's what's been going on for the past almost 100 years. It's not.
So we think we could have stolen everybody's gold.
Or vice versa. We might have none. And so my point is, there's nothing illegal about that. That's how banking works. It's only when it's never audited and no one knows what's going on, which is very similar to how much money does the Federal Reserve print? No one really knows.
But again, all things that need to be, and I'll go back to my original statement, that should be sort of brought to light here for good or for bad. Let's let the truth come out and sort of let the cards fall where they may and pick them up accordingly. But, whether it's Elon that does this, with his little team of, super geniuses, or if it's somebody else, doesn't matter. It needs to get done. And it needs to be transparent in a way that at least, we sort of can identify and figure out the best path forward. Because again, all of these things happening behind this little curtain are not really beneficial to anybody other than us wearing conspiracy caps.
I like my horns. I just think this is a bigger issue than just Elon making efficiency out of the government departments. There's repercussions on this one.
Yeah.
There's repercussions on all of it.
Yeah, agreed. All right. That's all I got for this episode of Conspiracy Theory. I want to thank everyone for that one. I'm going to do a quick review of the stories we hit, and we're going to get your guys' thoughts on what was the most relevant one. So on story 1, we tackled the Future of Jobs report. World Economic Forum releases their report for 2025 of how AI is changing the employment scene. The New York Times goes all in on AI tools. We have a new Grok 3 AI model that is out. It's the current front runner for all the models out there. And, of course, Doge auditing the U.S. gold. Michelle, what do you think was the big story for the week and why?
I think that parents who are looking at helping their kids work out what their work future looks like should start thinking about, what kind of skill sets and courses they need that might come from certifications rather than university. And then entrepreneurs and people who have skill sets starting to look at how they can create courses and things like that to assist in that process in the next 10 years.
So the AI jobs thing, I agree. Mike, what's your take? What was the big stories for the week?
Well, first of all, I kind of agree with you, Michelle, and I hope that is taken into consideration more so in the fact that, you can get these certifications and experience and get paid to do it instead of, owing $80,000, $90,000 at the end of it for something that you may not even be able to use. But for me, I think that what I would love to do here is take Grok 3 and repurpose that World Economic Forum, piece and prediction and see what Elon's AI model predicts that, the job market in the future is going to look like with respect to dying industries and profiting ones.
Well, I'll expect a report next week from you about that. Since you've got the tools, Mike, you can do it.
I'll start it at 4:28 p.m. and it'll probably be an A+ report
next Thursday.
My big takeaway, I'm going to agree with both of you guys. The AI jobs future work thing. I think that skills being more valuable than degrees is the world going forward forever. It's never going backwards. And I think that the technology folks, Mike, you can speak to this better than any of us, have been doing that for forever. Mike,
I was going to say this isn't new.
Right. It's new to the non-tech world. Just like remote work was new to the non-tech world, but those folks have been doing it forever.
You could have easily gotten a degree at your local or a certification at your local community center in plumbing or accounting back in the day. It's just that most people didn't be introduced to that path. And I think, the skill set has always been the most important thing. We've created this facade that all of a sudden I have this degree, now pay me. That's more important, but that's not the way that the real world operates. And I think that that's the illusion that we've sort of given ourselves because we went through it, right? But, we're starting to sort of wean back on that and hone in that the skill sets are more important because guess what? AI disappears tomorrow. There's no more electricity. Your fancy degree isn't going to be important. It's going to be how can you survive?
But let's not kid ourselves. For all those generations, the purpose of college, university was to get a job, not to get smart.
Well, that's what we told ourselves until basket weaving degrees.
You can get a degree in anything now. I tell you, when you've got a kid having to look at university courses or, different colleges and stuff, and like you name a topic like, nose hair plucking, there's some certification you can get for that. So it's everywhere. An interesting thing in the 2000s here in Australia, we have what's called TAFE. So their TAFEs are where plumbers and electricians and all of that get trained, hairdressers, beauticians, that kind of stuff. In the 2000s, they closed so many TAFE colleges in Australia because everybody was going to have an office job and nobody was going to need skills and whatever. And now we're in the middle of a plumbing crisis where there's no, people realize that when your toilets are blocked and there's no one to fix it, or they come out and cost $2,000 because there's 10 of them in the whole state. So now they're starting to open TAFEs again, so it's all a bit of a cycle thing, isn't it? And so, eventually we'll get smart enough to know that we do need these services all the time, regardless of whether we, have manufacturing jobs anymore or whatever. So, yeah, I think it's
we feel that pain mostly when there's issues with truckers. A lot of people think that they're just a pain in the ass on the highway, but the reality is that they are literally the ones that make the world go round. And if they stop doing what they do only for a half a day, everybody feels it. And it's crazy, but this is the engine that makes all of this work. It's these
that was one of the things. That was one of the things from COVID that we realized, didn't we? It's all very well to have the little grocer man down the corner, and not buy from him and go to the big conglomerates or whatever. But suddenly, the guy who was picking up the stuff from the farm and selling it from his roadside stall became an essential worker in essence, because he could feed us.
I love that concept.
And the guy at the liquor store, they were both essential workers.
All right. I want to thank everyone for listening, for the interaction. Special shout out to the Bolt Nation. As always, we are grateful for all the support we get. We read every comment for those who want to leave them, even after the episodes have posted. We are back every Wednesday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time, 8:30 a.m. Thursday. All right, we're getting there. And so we'll be back next week. I want to say thanks to everyone. A peace to and any final comments from my colleagues.
Bye.
Follow us on Threads.